Ladies and gentlemen, the ISAS Korean Institute for International Economic Policy Joint Symposium will commence shortly. May we invite you to take your seats and kindly switch off all mobile phones or electronic devices. At best case, at least put it to silent. Thank you. Distinguished guests, speakers, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Amrish and I have the pleasure of being your MC today. We welcome you to today's ISAS-KIEP Joint Symposium on India, Japan, and South Korea, Political and Economic Cooperation. To start proceedings, it is my pleasure to invite Professor Subrata Mitra, Director and Visiting Research Professor, Institute of South Asian Studies, NUS, to deliver the welcome remarks.
Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of our chairman, Ambassador Sri Gopinath Pillai, and the ISAS community, I'm delighted to have you all here and join us in an afternoon of conversation and contemplation on the important theme of India, Japan, and South Korea, political and economic cooperation. This is a joint event for the Institute of South Asian Studies, our institute, and the Korea Institute of International Economic Policy. Thank you very much for making the pilgrimage to Singapore, we all do at some point, and joining us. ISAS is actually not one institute, but two. This is two institutes folded into one. The one that most people see is a think tank. We are a think tank of the Ministries of Foreign Affairs and Trade and Industry. Singapore, tiny Singapore, has very large think tanks. The room where we are also belongs to a think tank, not ours, it's the Middle East Institute. There are think tanks also for East Asia. Just across from here is the sumptuous building of Southeast Asian Institute. These think tanks are a way of connecting Singapore to the world in the area of opportunities. Opportunities for joint activities, opportunities to get to know one another, opportunities to stay connected to important, vital areas of the world. In our field, we connect contemporary South Asia to Singapore and Singapore to South Asia in three major areas. I'm now welcoming Excellency, the High Commissioner of Sri Lanka. Thank you. In the three major areas of foreign policy, trade and economy, and governance of these societies. In addition, we believe that South Asia is where South Asians are. So there are about 30 million South Asians outside of South Asia. We call them, following the Israeli example, the South Asian Diaspora. Their combined income probably rivals that of the combined income of South Asian states. And they are a repository of knowledge and opportunities. So in addition to our mandate, we also organize every second year a very large South Asia Diaspora Convention. These are the various events that constitute the activities of ISAS as a think tank. In addition, we are an integral part of the major university called National University of Singapore, a highly ranked research university. And as a part of that university, we are responsible, we are required, we are expected to contribute to knowledge. Contribute to knowledge in the fields of foreign policy, trade and economy, and governance. In order to meet these very high expectations, we have a fantastic research community it's a small community of 28 people, not all are present here at the moment, but they contain not only academic knowledge of the world, the evolving South Asian world. ISAS also has a policy of inviting to be in residence major movers and shakers of the world. You'll have an example today when you see the second panel chaired by my colleague, Ambassador Dr. Chaudhary. I'll be talking about him in a minute. We bring in also people who have been foreign ministers, finance ministers, governors of reserve banks, or major controllers and auditor generals of South Asia. The point is, the knowledge of how societies work, how governments work, why do states hold together sometimes and why do they go kaput? This kind of knowledge is not only book knowledge, that's also lived-in experience. And ISAS, as a think tank and research institute, pulls together these public men and women and scholars. The result is published in terms of short briefs of about 1,000 words on important things happening out there, slightly longer insights, much longer working papers, as well as scholarly books and contributions to scholarly journals. That, more or less, is the second activity of ISAS as a research institute. Of course, in addition to being a think tank and a research institute, we are a major platform on South Asia in Southeast Asia. We showcase major events, invite important people to come and speak, and on the top of everything else, we are also required to build up the capacity of Singaporeans to think about South Asia, to have credible knowledge of South Asia. So activities like this are open to public, and we are very pleased to be able to welcome so many people and to bring you home to South Asia, to South Asia, South Korea, and Japan, and other events like this. We also train Singaporeans as interns. Our MC today is also an intern, hoping one day they will join us in another capacity as a fellow researcher and fellow think tanker or thinker. That is the repertoire of functions that makes us an institute. Now a little about this particular event. The event that we are organizing today is a very major event for South Asia, for India, for ISAS, and for Singapore, because it brings together, I would like to argue, three major powerhouses. I'll start with India. There was a time, like when I was young, there was a time when smart Indians had to go west. Go to America, get a PhD there. Go west, young man. I mean, this is also an American expression. That's when Western United States was being colonized by the East. So in my generation, we all were looking westwards. India has now turned around and discovered or rediscovered that it is a major Asian country, and the action is no longer in the West, but it's in the East. First came from Prime Minister Narasimha Rao the whole idea of look east, and now it has become, under Prime Minister Modi, Act East. Act East is connecting to Southeast Asia, Eastern Asia, and the roadblocks that were preventing India from connecting properly are also slowly falling off. And most important of all, the good relations India now has with Bangladesh has made it much more effective in terms of thinking of India's northeast, the seven sister states, Assam, Manipur, Nagaland, and so on, which were landlocked before as a land bridge between India, Southeast Asia, and East Asia. This is the new context in which this particular event takes a new shape, which is to think in terms of connecting even more closely to Japan and South Korea. When I was doing some research on the significance of this event for the Institute of South Asian Studies, it came across to us that infrastructure, maritime security, and manufacturing are the three major components of the Act East policy, and in that sense, India's involvement with South Asia, Southeast Asia, and East Asia. Infrastructure, less said the better. Those of you who have visited India, particularly going from Singapore, would have noticed India's pothole roads, India's rather slow telephone system or slow-moving trains and so on. And ports, less said the better. When I first came to Singapore, I was pointed out to this major cranes standing up. If they're standing, Singapore is not working. If they're not standing, Singapore is working. And that is how I learned how quickly Singapore clears ships which are loading and unloading, and how long it takes in India to do that. These are the areas where India needs a lot of work, just like India needs a lot of work, not so much in the IT industry, but in manufacturing. And maritime security has increasingly emerged as an important challenge for South Asia, for India, and also an opportunity for ISAS. Originally, Indian Ocean was not a part of our mandate, but we have decided that governance is not just governance on land, but also governance on sea. So maritime governance has increasingly become an important part of our agenda. So pulling these things together, I can assure you the conference today is very much at the heart of the ISAS agenda. Now, why Japan? Why Korea? Again, a little bit of research showed me, I was amazed that the first Japanese official development assistance to India was given in 1958. I had been to Fukuoka for a conference, and I had seen the devastation that the war had done. So how quickly the Japanese organized themselves and got connected to India, and how the Japanese keep the trauma of nuclear war, and how severe their sanctions were against India after the last nuclear test. And again, the same Japanese, how quickly they have come around and signed with India a civil nuclear deal. And right now, as this conversation is going on, the excitement is about the high-speed rail corridor between Ahmedabad and Mumbai. This will show you how dynamic Japan-India relations are and how important they are, therefore, to us. Now, on Korea, I was amazed to find that 40% of India's mobile market actually belongs to Samsung and LG, and that Hyundai, the motor company, has a 21% share of India's domestic automobile market. That again shows how important these connectivities are. I actually come from India. I was born in Odisha, and we know in Odisha, long back, Odisha had already started building a purpose-built deep sea port, purpose-built expressway to export high-grade minerals and mining ores to Japan through the Paradip port, and South Korea similarly has very strong connectivities with Odisha. And today it's my joy to see so many very important people from Japan and Korea joining us for this workshop as participants in a conference which I'm sure will produce a lot of new knowledge and will go on to contribute to the acceleration of India-Japan-Korea relations. One more word now as a political scientist. Are these three states comparable? All three have known either foreign occupation or foreign colonization. They've emerged from it. They are old societies and relatively new states in that sense, and they are important partners now and getting on with it. But that is where, as a political scientist, I would argue the comparability ends. Chalmers Johnson, an important political scientist, had written a book called MITI, M-I-T-I, and Japanese Development, where he had shown that there are two kinds of states. There's one kind of state which is a developmental state, which makes up its mind as to what its development should be about, and then gets on with it. Or in other words, the agenda of development is not a part of everyday politics. It's political, but it's little above politics. So politics within the system can go on, but the politics of the system is given. Singapore is a state like that. India, on the other hand, is a kind of state where everything is up for grabs. In India, everything is a part of politics and therefore a part of the political marketplace. And that kind of state, we were told, would have a problem in making a breakthrough. Why is that? If everything is up to the political market, if everything has to be voted on, how can you go from here to there if going from here to there means taking land away from people or getting people to work long days and pay them a minimum wage? These are issues where you need investment. To invest, you need to extract, and you can't very well extract from people if you have to go back to them every 5 years, every 2 years, or every day to ask them for their support. It is, as they say jokingly, like asking turkeys to vote for Christmas. So it was predicted that India cannot make it because it's a soft state. Now, today, looking back, you can see how far India has come. And yet, the structure of democracy and the constitution and federalism remain intact. So how did India make that breakthrough? What can India learn from Japan and Korea? And what can India teach? That is the knowledge flow and counter flow. That is the stuff of research, and that's also an expected output from this workshop. I would not stand much longer between you and the workshop, but I would say a little bit about our two chairs, because the chairs will be chairing their panels and their panelists, but there's no one to cheer them, so I'll do the needful. The first panel will be chaired by Dr. Dipinder Singh. The fact is, when you work closely with people, when you see them every day, you don't really ask deep questions about who they are. So I had to do some research on Dipinder, and I discovered he's a man of many economic parts. Man of many parts, Dr. Dipinder Singh Randhawa specializes in finance and economics and has an interest in infrastructure, microfinance, informal sector, constraints on investment, policy analysis and governance, and skills development, because he's anchoring a major workshop next week on skills. Now, Dipinder has taught or researched in the United States, Singapore, China, Thailand, and India, and the forgotten one is Bhutan as well. And he is a professor. He has been a professor in Syracuse and Delhi School of Economics. He has got a master's there, but he has taught in Syracuse. I was in Rochester, which was the next door. And he will be the chair, and the second panel will be chaired by Dr. Iftikhar Chaudhary. Again, God doesn't send us many like Dr. Chaudhary. Here is someone, an ace diplomat, who is also one of the last doctoral candidates, successful doctoral candidates of Hedley Bull, the arch neorealist. He's a neorealist, but he's also a good person, because realists are they're much more driven by interest than by values. And Dr. Chaudhary from Bangladesh has been a very successful diplomat at many different major platforms of the world, including the World Trade Organizations. The United Nations Security Council was one of the anchors of that major resolution called Responsibility to Protect. Now you are facing the major challenge of your career as a former Bangladeshi foreign minister, Bangladeshi diplomat, and now, next door are the Rohingyas, and you are writing avidly on them. Dr. Chaudhary has been one of the major bulwarks of ISAS, and he's our principal research fellow, and he would be chairing the second panel. With these long introductions, let me now hand over the conference to the MC with a little reminder that this is Singapore. Every event is an investment, and every investment must have a payoff. That's called a takeaway. So I will stop here and start taking notes of the proceedings so that I can have the last 5 minutes of this afternoon to give you a list of my takeaways and invite you to compare them to your takeaways from this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Professor Mitra. We now commence with session 1 of the Symposium on India and South Korea. I'd like to invite the following speakers to take their seats on stage. Dr. Choongjae Cho, Research Fellow, South Asia Team, Korea Institute for International Economic Policy, South Korea. Mr. Samyuel Park, General Manager and Team Leader, General Affairs Team, Hyundai Motor Company, Seoul. Dr. Sojin Shin, Visiting Research Fellow, Institute of South Asian Studies in US. And last but not least, our chairperson, Dr. Dipinder Singh, Senior Research Fellow, ISAS and US. During the question and answer session after the presentations, we also have the pleasure of having Mr. T.M. Kumar, Advocate for Hyundai Motor India, join the panelists. I will now hand the floor to the chairman to commence the session.
Thank you, Amrish. Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to all of you, and a warm and sultry afternoon in Singapore. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you, Professor Mitra, for your very wise counsel. Very few words to add, aside from the fact that this is an event I think that's long overdue at ISAS. If you ask any person on the street in India to name what consumer products come to mind, it's almost inevitably that the list that you're going to get is Maruti Suzuki, Hyundai, Sony, Sharp, Daewoo, LG, Toshiba. These are the consumer goods that are known amongst the wider Indian public. And all of these are, of course, coming from the two countries that we are focusing on today. Personally, when I was studying economic history, we started off, as most economic historians do if you're doing global history, with the Industrial Revolution, but soon we moved on to study of the Meiji Restoration. And that brought us closer to home and realized what transformation and liberalization and opening up could do in Asia. Of course, that was followed by the parable, which is very widely known now, of the flying geese syndrome, the open market policies that were pursued across East and Southeast Asia, which led to the first generation of tigers. I recall, and this with a sense of irony, a comment by a former Indian Prime Minister who said, as recently as 1960, India, Malaysia, and South Korea were almost at similar levels of per capita income. We know very much where the differences lie today. Another bit that I recall from economic history was, at the turn of the last 20th century, you spoke of two countries that were going to reign supreme, like today is called the Asian century. At the beginning of the 20th century, two countries were considered to be would be at the forefront by the end of the century. One was Japan, of course, and the other was Argentina. We know very much from history what transpired. And in India, again, we can see that open market policies initiated in 1991 is what led to the transformation. India has a long way to go yet. I mean, there are promises, occasional hiccups, a couple of steps forward, a few steps back, but it's moving along, and I guess there is considerable potential. The focus of this session is on, I'll be very brief in my comments, is, of course, on the first session is on South Korea. And this, again, holds tremendous potential. There have been hiccups here with the POSCO, which my colleague Dr. Shin is extremely familiar with. But nevertheless, with the Samsung, LG, Kia, investments in India, you can see substantial movement forward. And as very recently, I think there's a major investment coming up in Andhra Pradesh and industrial park in Rajasthan. And so what is, I think, quite significant is also the announcement late last year by President Moon that the partnership with India is going to be taken forward to the same strategic level as South Korea's partnership with the United States, Japan, China, and Russia. So there is considerable untapped potential where we'll hope to see some forward movement. Without much ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Choongjae Cho. Dr. Cho is no stranger to India. He's one of the foremost academic researchers in South Korea on India, but I wouldn't say just an academic researcher because that means you're sitting in the office. He has a very keen sense of what's been going on at the grassroots level. And we were just chatting before the seminar. He's been to India twice within the last month or so and traveled the breadth and length of the country. Dr. Cho would be speaking on a very topical and current theme, which is unfolding right now, and that's Modinomics and Korea-India economic cooperation. Comparison between Korea and Japan in India. And I'll pause at the next phrase, the next China. Dr. Cho, please.
Thank you, Chair. First, I would like to say thank you so much for giving my institute, ISAS-KIEP, to co-organize this wonderful symposium. And privately, thank you for inviting me and making me a first speaker of today's symposiums. My English has much problems, so if I will do well, I think everything will be fine and perfect. I think my topic is Modinomics and Korea-India economic cooperations. So, okay, yeah. My presentations has three parts. Now I try to start at the Modinomics first. I was a researcher, so in 2015, one of my reports was on Modinomics. In that times, I tried to level a lot of the materials, like you can see the books, including that books, but it does not much help me in that times. Instead of the materials, the policies, his policies and achievement in Gujarat as a chief minister helped me more. What he pursued was to establish a virtuous cycle structure of the economy. In the virtuous cycle of the consumption, investment, and the employment, the driving force he found was investment, especially the private investment, including the foreign investment. All countries want to set up these the virtuous cycle structures, but in the advanced economy, including Korea, it is not easy because of the agings and polarizations and automations, etc. But India is free in this respect. So in order to promote the private investment, Modi has implemented pro-business policy, concentrated budget expansions in infrastructure, and abolished the regulations. This was the result. Yeah, this is the result in Gujarat. During about more than 10 years, the state GDP and the per capita GDP has more than tripled. I was also invited in 2011, you can see, in the 2011 Vibrant Gujarat, I am taking hands with the Modi as a chief ministers. It is a kind of some big investment roadshow of the Gujarat. So as you can see, the Gujarat has achieved a higher economic growth rate than the India, the red line. Yeah. So in drawback of the friendly corporate environment, that's why we called a China in India. The Gujarat is a China in India. Since the Prime Minister's inaugurations, Modi has operated India in the same way as in Gujarat. The Make in India, Smart City, and anti-corruptions. These are the policies that represent the private investment promotion, infrastructure expansions, and regulatory reforms. I will not explain this anymore. But he also has challenges such as the revision of labor laws and the land acquisition law. Fortunately, the GST, Good and Service Tax, has been in force since last July. I believe that India will develop steadily without Modi or Modinomics. I have observing the Indian economy for more than 20 years more. I know well the potentials of Indian economy. But at this moment, India, under the Modinomics, is certainly next to China. And Modi is an accelerator and a promoter of the next China in India, I think. Since the Modinomics, both Korea and India have some fruits. 2014 and the 15th, the summit were held consecutively. These were the first. The last summit, the bilateral relations were upgraded to the status Special Strategic Partnership. This was followed by the Russia and Japan. The both agreed on the SEPA, the upgrade negotiation, by 2017 this year, and the both agreed on a kind of the financial support to India, which amounted to $10 billion US, including $1 billion EDSHEP, Economic Development Cooperation Fund. It is a kind of a concessional development loan of Korean government. But the bilateral economic cooperation, such as trade and investment, has been stagnant. In 2010, the SEPA, FTA, between both took in force. But the trade has stagnant since 2011, breaking the $20 billion US. You can see this, the bar graph in red. These are the exports to India from Korea. These also have been stagnant since 2011. These are the next the graph. These are the FDI share, a kind of a ratio by countries in India. The share of the Japan has been at least 10 times the higher than the Korea every year. Since 2014, after the Modinomics, China went faster than Korea. These tables, okay, you can see. These tables show more clearly when it was beginning of the Modi government by August 2014, the lower tables. The Japan recorded about 17 billion US, but by last June of this year, that increased to more than 26 billion US, approximately around 10 billion increase rather than before. But the Korea recorded 2.3 billion US. it is less than 1/10 of Japan. You can see this, the gray. Oh, sorry. In 1990s, Korea led FDI in India. The Korea, once the first movers, has become a followers, with the huge gap between the leaders at this moment. And also, these are the number of Japanese companies in India. By last years, more than 1,300 companies were in India. But the number of Korean companies recorded maximum 850s. Korean companies such as Hyundai, Samsung, LG, their performance in India has been very successful. Directors also already explained. But in terms of the FDI volumes and the number of companies in India, especially after the Modinomics, Korea has been behind. And the most Korean companies were concentrated in Delhi and the Chennai area. But Japan's companies were diversified to the region, north, south, west, even the east. Behind this tremendous performance of the Japan, there has been long forward strategic, concrete, and target-oriented efforts by the Japanese government to avoid China risk early. As far as I know, since anti-Japan movement resulted from going to worship at Sharin by the Prime Minister Koizumi, Japan turned its target to India from China. First, India was the biggest recipient of the Japanese ODA instead of the China. After upgrading the relationship to the Global Strategic Partnership in 2006, the summit has been held annually. The DMIC, the director also explained, the Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor is what we know well as one of the big projects between both. Through the summits, the bilateral goals, visions, and accomplishments are actually planned and managed. The high-speed passenger train, Shinkansen, directors also already mentions. And the nuclear power generation agreement is already finished. And the last summit ended just before 2 weeks ago. The two leaders, Modi and Abe, participated in the groundbreaking ceremony of Shinkansen. Then, how Korea have to do? I think Korea also have to establish more the concrete and sustainable cooperative framework with India. We, Korea and India, have to succeed the last two consecutive summits as soon as possible, and both should regularize summit annually. Through the summits, the both have to make visions and tasks for further cooperations. Based on the summit, joint minister talks by fields, the private partnership committee, and cooperations with Indian states have to strengthen. The Prime Minister Modi called the President Moon and tweeted it in Korean. As you can see here, it's small. The Modi already asked to him to have a summit in India as soon as possible. I think Korea have to respond to the Modinomics more aggressively. Now, in the last summit, Narendra Modi Prime Minister asked to invest in manufacturing industry such as shipbuilding, the steel, electronic hardware, and infrastructure, especially in the smart city and industrial corridors. He visited a shipbuilding yard by himself in Korea during the last summit, and he met many Korean businessmen. It was very unusual. We Koreans have to more interest in these industries. And I think the smart city is very, very good field of cooperations between both. I think the Korea have experienced to develop a variety of cities successfully in very short period. The Korea have to design an original size, optimal size, and the conditioned smart city based on manufacturing industries with India. Korea and India can use $10 billion US, which was agreed in the last summit. I think a smart city project will be a breakthrough in expanding and deepening the stagnant bilateral economic cooperation. So far, I told you my thought, and I'm expecting that the cooperations between Korea and India will be accelerating in the future, especially in the new Korean government, because in top 100 national tasks of new government, Korean government, there are 3 tasks that are relevant to India. Because new government know well the potential of India, and also know well the India as a next China. With Asian, the India is designated as a key partner for cooperations in the new national task of a new government. It is very different from the other government in expressing the target countries in this way. Hoping that the more the advanced relations between Korea and India both, will be delivered by myself here again next year. I would like to conclude my presentations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cho. That's very insightful, and you've painted a very broad canvas of the main issues that underlie the growing relationship between Korea and China. And I'm sure many of our guests would be keen on taking it up during the question and answer session. So you provided a macro view, and now we'll turn to a more of a micro perspective. We're very happy to have with us Mr. Samyuel Park. He's the General Manager and Team Leader, General Affairs Team at the Hyundai Motor Company. He's just coming in from Seoul. He's someone who's had almost seminal experience in India in the industrial sector, and he knows what it took and what it takes to navigate your way through in some of the early days as well. You were there in Chennai, I believe, for what, 6 years. 6 years. 6 years. Setting up, and which is one of the largest automobile plants, which has generated a lot of externalities in the neighboring areas, in the supply chain, and imparting skills. Yeah. I believe it's changed the skills landscape in the area as well. Without much ado, Mr. Samyuel Park, he'll be speaking, of course, on Hyundai Motor Group's investments in India.
Can I stand in there? I'm not used to staying.
Sure.
Almost my senior there. So this is more better. Yeah. Nice to meet you, everyone. I am very honored to have this good opportunity to be invited to this symposium. Today, I would like to share information and experience about how Hyundai Motor Company made a good investment capital investment in India, and how Hyundai Motor India made a good, successful story. So actually, this is a successful story, very huge story. But I was allotted 20 minutes. Within 20 minutes, I'll start. Okay? Yeah, I'm very sure. But actually, Mr. Cho also told English fluency not much good, but simple speaking plus many of images and photo. Don't worry. I'm very sure you can fully you understand what I'm point. Okay. Anyway, let me introduce myself really briefly. I have worked for Hyundai Motor Company 20 years. In the world's largest company, Ulsan plant, 9 years. And next move to, I was dispatched to India. Stayed there 6 years. And after come back to headquarters, I was in charge of dealing with all overseas plant among Kia and the plant. There are how to manage people, how to make nurturing people, like the HR, leadership, or like this. So my presentation is made up of 3 parts. First is what is just introduction of Hyundai Motor Group. Next, about Hyundai Motor India. The most interesting from your viewpoint, the success of the Hyundai Motor India. Let me tell you. Hyundai Motor Group is a very large company. In Korea, Samsung Group is the first number 1. Second is Hyundai Motor Group. So like this. And Hyundai Kia Motors, we have a global network and manufacturing plant and R&D center and sales office also all over the world. Hyundai Motor Group, we have investment strategy was in focusing on BRICS company, Brazil, India, Russia, China. All we had plant all the area. The reason why we invest in India, simple, as you know, everything, population. Sooner or later, I'm very sure the India population catch up China population. Next here, focusing. Now number of the car per 1,000 population, India level is very low level. And even though 2015, 167 cars, which means India is a very potential country. Here, show you some renowned institute forecasting. Yeah, maybe in the future, in automobile industry, India car domestic sales going up. Because of that, Hyundai Motor Group, we invest in India. So let me tell you our Hyundai Motor Group status. You know, we are number 5. Oh, sorry, number 5. Sorry. First Toyota, number 1, Volkswagen, and the GM, Renault Nissan, Hyundai Motor Company. Now we are like this. We also achieved rapid growth. One thing here, I give you some more information. Today, according to Mr. Kumar information, recently, Volkswagen and General Motors, they left the Indian market. But we have invested in the name of a Kia plant. Okay? Anyway, this, from now on, this is your Hyundai Motor India. HMI means Hyundai Motor India. Okay? 1996 for groundbreaking. Now total accumulated investment 3.1 billion. Now 8,500 people they're working all across the India. We have a sales branch. Our plant is Is phase 1 or plant 1. From plant 2, engine transmission plant, they are big size. So this is the first plant 1, 1996 groundbreaking, and 1990 mass production. So here around the 7 cars we are now selling and producing and selling. And plant 2 also, 2005 groundbreaking and 2007 mass production. We also here 4 cars. So we have around 670,000 cars produced and selling. This is yearly wise. We produce the car. For example, this year's 2017, we are produce 672,000. So upper side is a domestic market. Downside is export. Let me give you. Here, in India domestic, number 1 is Maruti Suzuki. Here, 47%. And number 2 is Hyundai Motor Company. Then next, Tata Motors, Ford, Toyota, Renault, Honda, Nissan, like this. So we are number 2 in domestic market share. Here left is domestic. Even now, let me tell you, export. Here is export. We are number 1. We export the cars to the 92 countries. So this is in India market, we are number 1. And second is Maruti Suzuki, like this. Second is, Maruti Suzuki. So here is a Han news. On the basis of successful of Hyundai Motor India performance, Hyundai Motor Group also decided this year, we already have signed MOU with state government of Andhra Pradesh, already groundbreaking start, now under the construction. So maybe 1.1 billion, here is now only Chennai. So Annatapura here, around 500 kilometers away. So here Chennai, here, then here our vendor company. Our vendor company also supply both sides. So this is one of the strategy. Anyway, this is maybe congratulations. Okay, maybe this part you are most interested in this part, the success of factors. Let me tell you 5 one by one. First, investor strategy. Second, product strategy. So the SCM strategy. First is marketing, and then remain HR, ER management. Can you follow me?
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks. I just alone speaking. Yeah, I think. Okay. Investor strategy. The answer is single investment. 1995, 1996, India government not allowed any joint venture, any single investment. You see the Maruti, Fiat, Ford, Toyota, Honda. They didn't have 100%. Was a joint venture. Then how HMC project was approved by government? So our top management want already we study, preliminary study about the joint venture. What is a good point? What is a weak point? So we decided that we need a single point. So how to persuade the government? Our top management go to approach and proposal, very extraordinary proposal, such as we will, within 4 years, we will use local part around 70% above. At that time, the other rival company, their supply chain only 30%, 40%. So we announced that we utilize Indian local part, which means HMI grows, then Indian local company also grows. So they are very surprised at, and finally we got approved for the first time. Single investment was approved by government. How about the clapping? Yeah. Okay. Next, we segregate the 4 groups. Which area is the best area? Calcutta, Mumbai, and Delhi. Finally, we decide Chennai, because Chennai there relative advantage infrastructure, harbor, and international effort, and the development of auto part on the industry. Already there are so many automobile company. So proactive incentive provided by the state. Actual time, Mr. Kumar is here. He was in charge of the handling of dealing with the negotiator of the government. He get more incentive get from the government, and more abundant technological manpower and labor culture also. So we decided Chennai. Second, R&D or product strategy. As you know, India is a very unique country. As you know, because of extremely hot and humid climate, we enhance the cooling function of the engine and improve the performance of air conditioning. Definitely, absolutely, we have to do. And instead of 800 cc, we installed 1000 cc. This was a very good choice. And the culture here, Indian wearing, Mr. Dipinder, he's wearing turban. Yeah, thank you today. So here, because of that, turbo driving position should be down low. So we making tall boys types, like a mall type. This Sangtro we made. And then suspension also, Indian people pick up more people in the back seat. So we need to enhance the suspension. And the brake also more. Working road condition is not much good. And one more thing, sound on enhances to sound on. Why? Do you know? In case in Korea, you sound on, do you know what will happen? In Korea, to drive a fight. But India, police sound horn like that. Police horn, yeah, police horn. Police horn means, okay, no problem. I'm going this way. Okay, you go. Okay, like this. Totally different culture. Okay? So we also have got India Car of the Year. 2014, 2015, 2016, 3 years consecutive, we have I-quality winners. And for that, we already 2007, we set up Indian Technological Center, R&D Center in Hyderabad. Chennai here, in Hyderabad, we have already set up R&D Center where they are making and developing more good car product. Yeah. Then supply chain management strategy. As you know, to make a car is around 2,000 parts should be assembled. But at that time, at the 1996, 2000 time, the local part import tariff tax is around 24 and 40%. In case we import all parts from the Korea, then we cannot reduce the price. So we have we have no choice but develop a local part. So like this. So we engage 42 Korean vendor company at the same time, and we also develop local vendor 80 local vendors. So this company, okay. So here is Hyundai Motor is in the vicinity of the Hyundai. Here radius 10-20 kilometers. All our vendors should be there. So we can reduce logistic cost. So big size items they provide. Small size, the other local vendor company they supply. So this is a very good strategy. Even in case this will our vendor company also in next 2 years they will provide Kia plant also. Then third, marketing sales strategy. At the time we segregated 4 regional, and we adopt very mega dealer system. Then when we select the owner of the dealer shop, we also very strictly keep our principle. So anyway, across we are outlet. And the price also very appropriate price. And we also try to provide more sales and good service, which can differentiate itself from the rival companies. And with star marketing, Shah Rukh Khan, maybe some of you are already aware of him. Shah Rukh Khan, and India also very famous in cricket. So we are main sponsors of cricket, India Cricket Committee. So here is marketing. We are also focusing on CSR. Corporate social responsibility. We set up the HMI Motor India Fund. One car we selling, we accumulate $2 or $3. So we repay to the society. Okay, here I will give you this is our village, near the village. 1, 2, 3. Near the village, we voluntarily support them to make their village a good living place. So here is the final key success. We give them more education training and a good reliable relationship and the cultural harmony. Let me give you image. This is our send our technical leader to Korea and R&D Center. They get more good knowledge. And we take care of our employees, proactive approachment. Canteen and commuting bus and recreation center. This is recreation center in the build or some gym, something like that. Then we also very respect the Indian culture, very unique culture. So most of the Korean people, they try to make effort to mingle with the Indian. Like this here, our office workers, I was invited to Blue Workers House. And here, Mr. Kumar also is I was invited as high-level people. So maximum we try to mingle with the Indians. That is very important. So let me conclude my presentation. First, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, this is very important. But this case may be visible factors, which means our competitors easily follow this strategy. But what I'm saying is this HR or people, from the global company viewpoint, without considering, without getting their emotional trust, emotional believing, you cannot survive. So actually this is very difficult to imitate or benchmark. But in case, finally we have two customers. One is internal customer, our employee. First, we should get our employees support and harmony, labor management harmony. Second, external customer who buy our cars. So if we want to be most loved car brand, we focusing on people. Human beings the same. So let me conclude. Think globally, act locally means one final sentence is, you get what pay for. You get what pay for. So thank you for your listening. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Park. That was a very engaging and yet deeply insightful talk. You addressed some of the very fundamental issues that crop up with investments, right, from the formative stage to dealing with land and labor issues, down to the operational issues on the shop floor and how you manage to engage. And I must admit, this is the first time I've come across a product that's been customized for people with exotic headgear as well. So thanks, that's really novel indeed. It's my pleasure now to turn to my colleague, Dr. Sojin Shin. Dr. Shin's a very versatile political economist. She works on the political economy of foreign investment with extensive field experience in Odisha and in Tamil Nadu. It's not just the academic part. She spent time studying in India, did an MPhil at Jawaharlal Nehru University before coming to Singapore for, sorry?
Delhi University.
Delhi University, I'm sorry, my mistake, yes. That's more grounded in one sense in business, yes. Her work is in political economy of investment in India. So you deal with the entire spectrum of issues that crop up when a foreign investor is going on. Her topic today is a bit unorthodox, and this is dealing with the growing area of Korea's engagement with the rest of the world, and that is foreign aid.
Yes.
And it's been a steadily growing participation. So without much ado again, Dr. Shin.
Thank you, Dipinder. I must say before the talk, my talk may not be entertaining as to presentations before mine. It may be too academic and boring, but I hope you enjoy it. Today, I'd like to share my preliminary study on foreign aid to South Asia with the focus of South Korea as an aid donor nation. My talk proceeds in this order. First, I will explain the broader picture of foreign aid flows, especially official development assistance to South Asia, and see who the major donors to the region are. Then I will move to South Korea as a rising aid donor to the region and explore the rationale of why South Korea has been increasing foreign aid to South Asia, with a little bit of comparison with the Japanese model of ODA. And then the discussion is followed by challenges of South Korea as a rising aid donor in conclusion with some research questions or suggestions for future research. And what is ODA? ODA includes ODA indicates capital flows to developing countries provided by official agencies from the aid donor nation to promote economic development and welfare of the recipient countries. In fact, this term ODA is introduced by OECD's Development Assistance Committee, which is known as DAC, as a broader concept meaning foreign aid in general. So, however, aid practitioners around the United Nations, they preferably call it as development cooperation, since the words assistance or aid sound uncomfortable. So when we say ODA, it's a limited data set which only OECD estimates within its own framework. So as of today, in 2017, OECD's DAC consists of 30 countries over the world, but only South Korea and Japan, they are Asia's foreign aid donors in OECD's DAC group. Though India and China, they're rising as aid donors from Asia, their ODA outflows are not captured by OECD. So despite that, OECD's dataset is most broadly used for foreign aid studies. And ODA has concessional character, and at least 25% of total ODA should be provided in this concessional form. And ODA has been used in many sectors of the recipient countries, such as education, health, economic, and social infrastructure sectors, and debt relief, and many others. And South Asia has long been the world's second largest recipient of ODA after Sub-Saharan Africa by region. And according to OECD, the top tier ODA recipients in 2014 and 15 were from South Asia, which were Afghanistan and India. They were followed by Vietnam, Ethiopia, Indonesia, and Pakistan. Most of ODA resources were sent to socio-economic sectors to the South Asian countries. Then, who are the major donors sending aid to South Asia? I put 8 South Asian countries in an alphabetical order in the graph. So from the left, Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Maldives, Nepal, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka. And I sorted out the top 3 donor nations to each country based on bilateral aid flows. So the first bar in each country indicates the top donor, and the second bar means the second place, and then third one is the third rank. So you can see Japan involves almost every South Asian country as a major donor, while South Korea is just emerging as a major donor. But South Korea's ODA is expanding, especially in Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Afghanistan as well, though Korea is not listed in the top 3. I'm sorry, I'm not really recovered from the cold. So, South Korea is trying to increase the volume of ODA to the region, though Japan is far ahead of Korea to catch up. It is because Japan began sending ODA to the region as early as 1958, while Korea transformed as an aid recipient to a donor only in 1987. So there is a more than a kind of like 30-year gap between Japan and South Korea in this regard, but it's important to highlight that Korea's aid disbursement to the region has incrementally increased. And also, it's interesting to see how heavyweight Japan has put India in this matter. So for example, Japan sent around $1.5 billion in 2014 and 15, you can see in the graph, and it's almost half of India's gross ODA in those years. Now we see the patterns of foreign aid from South Korea to 8 countries in South Asia. Though you may not see the small scales from far, you can recognize the movement. So in general, Korea has substantially increased aid to partner countries in South Asia for the past 10 to 15 years, especially after 2004 and 5. Some parts present sharp increases. I'm sorry, the pattern is not as clear as I expected. except to India and Maldives. And one of the reasons why aid to India from Korea has been stagnant for a long time is that India didn't want to take bilateral tied loans except from multilateral organizations or G8 countries, which includes Japan. So also India has been in transition from an aid recipient to a donor by generating continuous growth. Despite it, South Korea's current Moon Jae-in government attempts to increase the volume of aid to India's economic infrastructure through differing channels. The two questions: one, what motivates South Korea's aid increase to South Asia? Two, how does Korea's aid framework differ from that of Japan? And South Korea began sending ODA from the late 1980s to South Asia and increased the volume after Indian tsunami took place, attacked a lot of South Asian countries in 2004. And the big earthquake in 2005 happened in Pakistan. At the time, the government of Korea was encouraged by a lot of NGOs advocating the expansion of Korea's ODA to South Asia. So it's possible to say that the source of non-state actors was quite influential in changing the Korea's government idea toward foreign aid. Since then, Korea's ODA to South Asia has increased substantially. And South Korea's state agency, Economic Development Corporation Fund, established in 1987, assists developing countries by providing funding for their industrial development and economic stability. And this EDCF offers usually tied loans with the help of Korea's Export-Import Bank, while Korea International Cooperation Agency, which is known as KOICA, provides concessional grants and technical cooperation. Like the other DAC donors, South Korea sends ODA to other countries through two branches, either bilateral or multilateral channels. However, there are many differing types of ODA, and a number of state agencies, they are involving the ODA policy implementation process. And this is the flow chart presenting how ODA projects are prepared, implemented, and finally evaluated. And what I'd like to highlight through this institutional arrangement is that you may not be able to capture coherent ODA data from differing organizations. So, which means, the ODA data is up to when you contact and which organization. So for example, Ministry of Finance in Korea updates multilateral ODA data to World Bank and ADB, while Ministry of Foreign Affairs deals with Korea's multilateral ODA, which is sent to the United Nations. So despite it, for now, OECD seems to most comprehensively capture the ODA data. And South Korea has sent a lot of foreign aid to different sectors in all eight South Asian countries. And I just selected some pictures from the ODA policy report issued by the government of Korea. And the pictures show internet network expansion project and power project in Bangladesh, and hydroelectric project in Nepal, and water and housing project in Sri Lanka, and aid relief to Pakistan. And how is South Korea's ODA framework differentiated from those of others? As some ODA studies suggested, the term South Korean alternative, which is different from that of Japan. And the concept model sounds more solidified, though the alternative implies more flexible usage. The first Korean alternative follows OECD's general aid principles for developing cooperation. And Korean aid framework acknowledges the Japanese model of ODA, but Korean model is more concerned with recipient countries' needs based on comparative advantage rather than Korea's national interest seeking. And South Korea is adopting the principle of comparative advantage and sending ODA to recipient countries' various sectors where Korea can generate bigger impact than others do. So in general, substantial part of Korea's loans went to specific infrastructure projects in recipient countries. Meanwhile, the ratio of loans and grants to human development sectors such as education, healthcare, vocational training is higher than other donor countries' focus. So South Korea's concerns on South Asia's human development sectors are not an exception. So I would argue that this tendency is driven by the idea of aid policymakers in South Korea in suggesting to developing countries how South Korea itself generated development with ODA in the 1960s and 70s. And as many of us know, Korea's economic development was substantially complemented by the high level of human development. So if we look at this data, my argument sounds more convincing. So left-hand side pie chart is South Korea's ODA disbursement by sector and recipient countries in 2014 and 15. And the right-hand side pie chart is that of Japan. And you can see 23% of Korea's total ODA went to education and health sector. And another 20.9% went to social infrastructure. Social infrastructure includes, again, education-oriented activities like vocational training. And on the other hand, Japan sent more than 50% of ODA to economic infrastructure sector in recipient countries. And Japan's focus on education, health, and social infrastructure accounted for less than 20% of total ODA. And there is a specific term, aid for trade, which OECD coined. And it is an initiative promoting the trade between aid donors and aid recipient countries. And as a leverage for poverty reduction in recipient countries, if we look at the top 10 recipients of aid for trade from South Korea and Japan, we can again see Japan puts South Asian countries in a higher priority than others. So it means that Japan considers South Asian countries as a serious trade partners. By building a close economic relations, it may want to extend such relationships to the national security building cooperation, especially with India. And South Korea is also concerned with South Asian countries as important trade partners, but they are still after some Southeast Asian countries or sub-Saharan nations. So based on preliminary findings through collating data and existing aid studies, I would suggest this model for major Asian aid donors' aid performance in South Asia. And the x-axis as complementarity. And if a donor nation's aid goal towards South Asian countries is higher, relatively higher, highly complementary to those of other countries, then it will be positioned on the right-hand side, the quadrant. And however, low complementarity does not mean that a donor country's aid goal is less efficient or bad. So instead, the lower complementarity indicates that a donor country's aid goals towards South Asian countries are more strategic and national interest seeking. And I put the y-axis as the aid donors volume towards South Asian countries and disbursement increase. So if the donor country sends a relatively higher volume of foreign aid to South Asian countries than other donor countries do, then it will be placed either quadrant 1 or quadrant 2, which is one of the upper quadrants. And I have 4 countries in the list: India, China, Japan, South Korea. Could you guess? Quadrant 1 is South Korea, of which foreign aid goals are highly complementary but less strategic. And still, Korea is sending high volume of aid to South Asian countries. Quadrant 2 is Japan, of which foreign aid goals are less complementary while highly strategic. Japan is thinking of their, its national interest first when they sent ODA to South Asian countries. But still, Japan sends a lot of huge volume of ODA to South Asian countries. And quadrant 3 is China. In China's foreign aid goals towards South Asian countries, their goals are not really complementary but highly strategic. They're thinking of their national interest first. But the quantity of foreign aid is quite low compared to those from Korea and Japan. And India is quadrant 4, and of which foreign aid policy is quite complementary but less strategic. But still, the quantity of foreign aid to South Asian countries, quantity is not very, very high. There are some challenges of South Korea as a rising donor in South Asia. And Korea still needs to increase the volume of development cooperation to South Asia further. And it needs to build resilient state agencies that can act efficiently even in the financial crisis. So for example, in 1997, when Asia's financial crisis took place, the government of Korea had to suspend the foreign aid to other countries. And Korea needs to cooperate with the recipient countries in enhancing institutions to allocate the aid resources and implement aid policies more efficiently. And to conclude, Korea is rising ODA donor not only in South Asia but also Pan-Asian regions. Korea's development cooperation is more concerned with the principle of comparative advantage, thereby allocated a bigger ratio to human development sectors such as education and healthcare sectors. And Korea's Asia-centered aid disbursement policy may not be changing in the near future. Though Asia's other aid donors like India and China, they're increasingly presenting their interest in Africa for their national interest. So I put some questions, further questions for future research. And it may be just my personal interest. And how do Asian experiences of utilizing foreign aid for development in the various socioeconomic and political contexts help countries in South Asia? Can Japanese model of ODA help South Asian countries' development? Or South Korea's model can be an alternative? And how well do the Japanese and Korean aid models travel to other Asian donors in developing their foreign aid framework to promote Asia's development and welfare? And how about India's foreign aid framework in this regard? And what does the Chinese approach of foreign aid to countries in Southeast Asia and Africa, other than those in South Asia, explain in the broader picture of Asian experiences of foreign aid? And can we think about the Singaporean experience in this context? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sojin. You've brought in very interesting perspectives, and these are issues that are not very widely known, and I'm sure they're going to raise a lot of debate, including questions about impact evaluation,
Okay.
which is a major issue. I mean, DFID, I know for one, does pioneering, cutting-edge work for that, and that metric's been very strongly recommended as well. We'll defer that for the discussion session. I would like to now invite Mr. T.M. Kumar to the panel. In case you're wondering why at this juncture, Mr. Kumar is an advocate. He's based in Dubai, and he studied law, and his bachelor is in literature and again in law. It's a very fascinating combination. He's a member of the subgroup on industrial policy in the state government of Tamil Nadu, and he was instrumental in facilitating Hyundai's entry and major investment in Tamil Nadu. So we're very fortunate in having both the demand and the supply side, so to speak, at the same table. I'd like now to turn to the Q&A session. May I request you to please identify yourself and let us know to whom the question is directed. Dr. Palit.
Thank you so much, Dipinder. My questions are for Mr. Park. I have two questions. Mr. Park, how do you see the prospects of electric cars in India? That's my first question, because I know that Hyundai has launched an electric car model, the Kona. Do you see that making good in India or a prototype of it? My second question is that after the GST, the SUV automobile sector in India is the highest taxed at the rate of 28%. So do you see this being a problem as far as sales of SUVs in India are concerned? And would that influence the Hyundai's manufacturing decisions in any respect? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your question. First, your question is what is our policy or strategy of adopting electric vehicle to India? Am I correct? Yeah. Actually, it's not major my job, but in Delhi case now already the air pollution situation very big problem. So according to my information, Delhi government also, India government, they try to restrict all the traditional cars, so and prohibited some diesel or diesel engine, something like that. As of now, we didn't have any plan to produce electric car, but at least from headquarter viewpoint, we also the eco-friendly policy is spreading all over the world, in China and India also. So anyway, we also focusing on at least the hybrid, and then maybe I think sooner or later, Hyundai India also they try to adopt or produce in Chennai plant. That is my answer. SUV case, SUV you thought GST is so very high. I cannot explain very specifically, but as you know, in our Chennai plant also making now Creta is a small SUV. So in case we do not produce our SUV in India, we cannot import from the Korea. So best option is anyway we have to develop more good SUV car. Yeah, that is my answer. Yeah.
Thank you. Professor Mitra.
Quick question to Mr. Park. Thank you so much. You are a busy man, and ISAS is not in the business of either producing or buying cars. You have come here entirely for knowledge. Thank you. Question to you is, one of the main takeaways from your talk today for me is that you have two customers, the internal and the external, and you take your workers very seriously. On one of the slides you showed why you went to Tamil Nadu and not to West Bengal, because of difference in the working environment and working attitude. Now, here is a old conviction that East Asian workers have a different attitude towards work than Indian workers. So have you experienced any culture gap when it comes to attitudes towards work, where your workers, we see them a happy, hardworking lot in your slides to begin with, or has Hyundai produced these attitudes through its own specific attitude, specific approach to manufacturing? That's a question to you. May I ask a second question? That's to my colleague, Dr. Sojin Shin. Sojin, we are fellow political scientists, and from Hobbes onwards, we have banned altruism as a motivation that goes into human behavior. All behavior is strategic, may it be Japanese, Indian, American, or Korean. We are all strategic, but in different ways. So, how is the Korean strategic behavior with regard to ODA different from the Japanese behavior? And is there a relationship between what Korea puts into India and what Hyundai gets out of India?
Just to streamline matters, we'll take a cluster of questions together. Is that okay?
Yeah.
A couple of questions. Ambassador Charles Tree, please.
Congratulations to all three presenters, all very stimulating, etc. My question would be directed at Dr. Shin, because I spent a few years in the planning commission of my country. And there is another way that recipient countries looked at aid, apart from being aid and development cooperation, which is external resource mobilization. And that's how we looked at it. We were there during the first years of Bangladesh, war-battered economy, etc. And my responsibility was negotiating with the Scandinavian countries, Norway, Sweden, Denmark. Now, there are two aspects which perhaps you didn't stress on so much, but obviously it's implied in your research. One is the absorptive capacity of the recipient. One of our great arguments, I mean, those days, Vietnam, Bangladesh, and Tanzania were considered the darling of the Scandinavian countries. But we used to argue that Bangladesh's absorptive capacity was very great. Obviously, for commodity aid, the absorptive capacity will always be greater than for project aid. But Bangladesh did well in utilization, and which is why there was a greater claim on us to our piece of the cake. Second is the negotiating capacity of the recipient as well. You see, apart from the strategic interests of the donors, there is also a factor in the negotiating capacity of the recipient in organizing the development cooperation in a way that it meets with the aspirations of the planned aspirations of the recipient. Is that not a factor in also determining quantums with regard to Japan and Korea? Thank you.
Mr. Anish.
Hi, my name is Anish Mishra. First, I'd like to compliment the panel for the brilliant presentation. It was very lively and interesting. Okay, my question actually extends out of India. If you look at the South Asian region, South Korea actually has very good relations with the other South Asian countries, particularly with Pakistan. If you look at, you see, South Korea have invested in the Lahore-Islamabad highway. The Korea Electric company is also involved in power generation projects. And one of the reasons for this is that because Korea and Japan actually offers infrastructure projects at very low interest rate. For example, the Lahore-Islamabad highway that I spoke about was charged at LIBOR +1. So I mean, so why is this session on India and not on the extended South Asia? I mean, except for Dr. Shin's presentation, who covered South Asia. Okay, the question that I actually I want to ask is on South Korea's perception of the role of China in South Asia. How do you think South Korea can actually rival the Chinese checkbook diplomacy in South Asia? Thank you.
Okay, we'll stop here and turn to the panel before the next set of questions.
Or may I ask one question to Mr. Kumar? In fact,
but I was just going to do that. In fact, I'll do that shortly. Yeah.
I see. May I have a quick question to you? As far as I know, you have a very extensive experience in India's market to help foreign investors to come and invest. And as far as I follow your career, and I knew you have worked for Hyundai Motors and many others as well since the late 1990s. And recently, you led Kia Motors negotiation with Andhra Pradesh successful. And do you see whether there is change that Indian government or state government has behaved like in the negotiation table to treat foreign investors like better, or of course, there will be some state-wise gap in this regard, and that's my short question.
I'll throw in a very quick follow-up. I mean, we are very fortunate in having both on the investor side and a non-state actor at the moment, you're freelancing as well. So you come relatively unencumbered by the dictate of the state, as it were. So one of the issues, just to add to Sojin's question, could you talk a bit about how you were able to work with the state departments and navigate the various issues that come up, right from land procurement to dealing with labor regulations, which I'm sure is a major issue, and so forth. So please, we can start off with
so maybe there is no questions to me. Maybe my English has much problems. It proved, yeah. So anyway, I would like to add the Dr. Balit. Nice to meet you again here. Add the questions. As far as I know, it is a kind of news related to the electronic car and the electronic battery industry. So as you know well, in Korea, have a very good the capacity to make the electronic battery for the vehicles. So many companies are already developed even to make the car to sales in China. But the China government, maybe I think there is no Chinese, right? Anyway, certainly maybe this is related to a kind of the geopolitical issue, definitely to the South issues. Certainly the Chinese government stopped giving the subsidy to the vehicle makers, just except the Korean makers. And as far as I know, so one of the biggest Korean chemical industry, LG Chemicals, they have a big capacity to the battery. So they have planned to invest, as far as I know, to China. But certainly they have to change something, because at this moment, and also the India also announced by 2013, the gasoline car have to ban to sell. Not so. At this moment, many Koreans are the electronic industry related to battery, and many companies have much interested in India rather than before, definitely. And also, this is my research area is related to the economic cooperations, but not too much related to the political issues. But anyway, this is also related to recent the issues. Well, we Koreans are highly dependent on the China in terms of the trade, especially export. About the 26% of all of our export just only depend on China. So, and also the global turmoil from the America. In that times, certainly G20 has helped to survive global economies. So in that times, without effort of Korea, without China, we cannot survive so early. In that times, all of the Korean export to another country the ratio is decreased. But just one country between Korea and China, the biggest market, the volume is not increased. So we can survive early. So in terms of economic dependence, in terms of economic cooperations, we, as for the Korea, is number one is the China. But recently, we have to change. You know, this is also some political issue, and also, I already also emphasize highly dependence, just one country, and just a kind of just only trade or investment. It is not so good for both. So I already told you, the new government already know this fact. So my new government changed the directions. So is it okay for your questions? And thank you.
Mr. Park, thank you.
Yeah.
Question from President Trump.
What is the difference, attitude, work moral, attitude, culture between some Korean and the Indian? That kind of question, actually, I got a lot of questions, similar question. Some person say that they call it global sense, global mind like this. So, first of all, let me give you my final conclusion. Answer is not much. There is no difference. Let me give you. Do you know? Have you heard about the miracle of Hangang? Which means very in Korea rapid growth. Since 1962 around 2000, last 50 years, Korea economy Korea achieved very economic growth. At that time, the DNA of working culture is simple. One is top-down, strong leadership top-down. Second is make result in any manner. Not process important, result is very important. Third is I'll give you order, you implementation. Next, fifth is I do not consider about comprehensive. You do your job, your division. So each division make it to the best, then finally get result. So this is this is one of the DNA of Korean CEO leadership. So 1997 they adapt this kind of DNA to the Indian workers. Do you know after 10 years what happened? As sometimes you heard about the Maruti Suzuki, very big turbulence, IR turbulence. At the same time, after 10 years, our endemic India also, we got a similar problem, IR turbulence. So because of that, I was dispatched to dealing with that kind of IR management. So finally, what I have done is I totally convert the situation, very reasonable labor and management situation. The secret is the next time I tell you. Anyway, so my point is how to treat with people, how to manage people is more important, which means management stimulate workers. Only workers, they naturally respond to what management have treated them, which means more reasonable treatment, reasonable approach to the people, then irrespective of Indian, Korean, Malaysian, no problem. Any workers, any people, they also return back to the management. So maybe now you think there is some different working style or attitude, but what I'm saying is human beings same. That is my answer. Thank you.
We still have a few questions to be answered. I'll just come to you in a moment, sir.
Okay, I'll try to be very quick. Thank you, Prof. Mitra and Dr. Chaudhary for very nice questions and insight. If Prof. Mitra's question points to the Korean style of ODA or FDI as more altruist, I mean, it may be compared to that of Japan. but there must be some counter argument as well. Like some may say, well, see, Japan has been the front runner, and since already Japan preoccupied economic infrastructure sector to send ODA to the recipient countries, then only South Korea as a runner-up position may need to seek the other, sectors which Korea can generate a bigger impact than that of Japan. So it may be like a debate, but my hunch and my argument still stays there. Korean's model, the nature of Korean ODA or Korea's FDI further, may be seeking more, recipient countries' needs. And for Dr. Chowdhury's comments, well, this is still my hypothetical model, which I need to study further. And I basically looked at more donor nations' perspective rather than how recipient countries feel and how they negotiate on the table with the donor nations to bring up more ODA or more ODA to the proper sectors or where they need. So, if I understand what you have pointed out, and if we look at this your point of view, then I need to look at the other recipients, how they behave compared to Bangladesh, and how they made ODA from Japan and South Korea more transportable. Thank you. And maybe a quick comment for Anish. Well, you are right. In fact, we need to study further how Asian, donors or investors, China, India, and South Korea, and Japan, they are competing together in Southeast Asia, not only in South Asia as well. Maybe you'd be interested in looking further. But and Korea's point of view on China, how China has been aggressive in occupying Southeast Asian investment and trade markets or even ODA. Well, Korea really doesn't think China as a competitor. But what we do, we just do whichever we can do for ODA recipient countries and their economic development and other stability. But ultimately, at the end of the day, all the Asian major donors, they will compete in all different Asian regions.
Thank you, Mr. Kumar.
Yep. I'll try and be ambitious in my replies. I'll pick a little from everywhere because I see a little lacunae in the replies, so I'm going to address them also. So I'm going to pick first from Professor Mitra's earlier opening statements and set the tone. The tone is, India is a land of islands of excellence. So you will never see the kind of development that is pervasive all over. So what we typically look at when an FDI is seeking India, we're looking at whether it's a resource-seeking FDI or is it a market-seeking FDI. And typically, POSCO was a resource-seeking FDI. And Hyundai was a market-seeking FDI. So the way you handle these investments are very, very different. And the answer therein lies why POSCO became what it became and what Hyundai became what it became. Because you cannot deal with a resource-seeking FDI the way you deal with a market-seeking FDI. Take a typical example. I heard this question of the EVs now from that corner. Typically, we have not seen any EV policy, electric vehicle policy from the government of India, except a statement which was just a week old or 10 days old. It was just out of the blue. So imagine the amount of investments that have gone into the automotive sector. So what is going to happen to those investments that have gone into the sector? So you see now a vacuum at a national policy level. Because these investments have come in as late as last month. 1.1 billion he showed you about Kia's investment. The vendor investment is another 1.1 billion minimum. So which means another 3 billion has just come and the government is off the cuff announcing a policy about an EV policy that's forthcoming. And the biggest country which is pushing for that is China. And now you look at, there is no strategic partnership at the regional level of the Southeast Asia. as to what should be the regional policy for this region in terms of automotive. So I see a lacuna there. And then I see a knee-jerk national policy reaction. And at the state level, where the investor is actually investing in, there is no policy at all. It just follows the market requirement. Somebody wants to invest, and then they cook up a policy. So there is a lot of disconnect within the regional players, within the national players, and within the state players. So to really articulate this narrative in an investment agreement is not an easy job, especially when it becomes a resource-seeking FDI. So given the complexity of the Indian democracy, which Professor Mitra said about politics and everything, and politics, and there is above politics. In India, there's nothing above politics. So you really have to visualize a transaction from a policy level to an implementation level. So that kind of expertise, where you can really bring the linkages between policy and an investment transaction, it doesn't exist much in my experience. Because the policymakers have very little exposure in actually implementing something. And the people who have implemented have very little exposure in actually having worked on policy development at a regional level, leave alone the national level. So navigating this entire spectrum and then hand-holding an investor is an art by itself. So answering your question, is there been a change? I don't think I see any change for the last 22 years, except that there is no need for change. Because if you had your visions right from the day one, like Hyundai was the first investment in 1995, which came with the economic liberalization. Like he pointed out, what was the reason the government of India reacted to our request for a wholly owned subsidiary? It was only a supply chain management strategy when the Japanese had already been there for 15 years and they were still importing engines and transmissions. And they were still using a technology which was redundant. Our strategy was to bring in a current technology, bring in an indigenization level of 90+% from day one, and we got a 100% owned subsidiary. So therein lies the answer. Do you need to really navigate the system that is so-called corrupt? I don't think so. I have done 3 projects in my career last 22 years. Each one was about 3 billion investment, starting with Hyundai, followed by Mercedes-Benz, and then again Kia. We have had a zero tolerance policy. So if you know the system, the policy and the framework, and you don't want to step outside that policy and framework, you have a very robust writ jurisdiction system which you can exploit, and really the only collateral can be time. So if you can factor that time in your transaction structure, then you can really navigate it in a very professional manner. So I think that answers my question. And even the latest investment agreement that was signed with Kia was signed with the zero tolerance clause, which you will never see in any other investment agreement in the country till date. So the Chief Minister, whose photograph I see here, had the gumption to sign that without any demur or protest. So that's the first agreement that he signed, whereby the state promised 100% zero tolerance practice. So it is possible. So when the investors come in, I tell them, you make your policy very clear to begin with, and then you strategize your investment. But if the investor were to dither in their approach to the market, then you have to go with the flow. So that has been my experience of 22 years. So I think that answers one part of the question. The other, as far as GST is concerned, as long as your indigenization levels are high, there is no need to worry about GST because it's a chain of events. So most of the companies in India manufacturing automobiles do not make SUVs which are wholly indigenized. They depend on CBU or SKD or CKD imports, so they cannot sustain this GST implication. But whereas companies like Hyundai, which have indigenized beyond 80%, don't have to worry at the low end of the SUVs. But definitely, yes, the high end of the SUV market is going to be affected. But then if you look at the Indian automobile market, what is the percentage of SUVs vis-a-vis the percentage of small and medium cars? So it really wouldn't make an impact for Hyundai at this point in time.
Thank you, Mr. Kumar. We're running a bit behind time, but we have time for the last cluster of questions in the order they were raised. Mr. Singh, Dr. Rana, am I right? Sorry. Omkar, I'm sorry. And Admiral Kaneda, just come to you. May I please request you to keep the questions brief and the answers as well?
Yeah, okay. My name is Omkar Shrestha. I'm adjunct faculty at NUS Economics Department. I have a small question for one of each. Dr. Cho, you said there's no question. Yeah, I do have one query for you. no, because you said that Modi economics, of course, you had a great compliments for that, as does the whole world. But then, trade and investment of Korea peaked in 2011, $20 billion. That was Narendra Rao's government. And then it got into stagnation throughout Modi period. You kept quiet. Why was that? You mentioned about land law, labor law. Those are the, then you didn't mention what happened to that. I thought those are the fundamental problems the country still have it. Regarding that, my query to you, Mr. Kumar.
Sorry, excuse me. May I just limit you to one question?
One question, one question for him. This is the question for him.
Right.
Now, this question for him is because he had a successful experience in Hyundai, Kia, and Mercedes. How did he manage to do this against these fundamental problems regarding land, impossible to get it, labor, impossible to hire and fire, and financial sector, impossible without compliance about 40% to the directed sectors by the government? And my question to Dr. Samyuel Park is, I've
really got, sorry, sir. We are hard pressed. The two other gentlemen.
Okay, thank you. I'll talk to them separately.
We have a break for tea.
Thank you.
Mr. Singh, a very quick question, and then we'll turn to Admiral Kaneda, please. Thank you.
Gurdeep Singh, PTI. Mr. Park, thanks for giving that big briefing on Hyundai. Would like to know, how did you develop those 80 vendors? You have put in a lot of efforts in getting them in there, and that's what every new manufacturing investor needs now. Can you share with us your thoughts? How did you develop those 80 vendors?
Yeah. Admiral Kaneda, please.
Thank you very much. My question is to Dr. Singh. You said there would be a lack of the strategy of the South Korean or the policy and implementation. And through your explanation this time, I didn't hear any word of a security or defense cooperation with the South Asian and North Asian country, including India. I think you need to consider such kind of things. And specifically, you might make a flavor of mind of public goods for the region. I think that kind of thing will be needed. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Dr. Cho?
Yeah, thank you.
And may I, since we are getting into the tea break, may I request all the panelists to keep your answers?
Thank you, Cassius, for me especially. The labor law and the land acquisition law, at this moment, it is definitely related to political issues. The laborers and the people who live in the agricultural area, they do not to amend the law under this Modinomics, because anyway, but GST has not too much objections like the labor law and the land acquisition law. So I think it takes some time. So that's why the Narendra Modi, he tried to get the political campaign to get more the vote from the peoples. Maybe you can understand. And yes, right. 2010, we took in force both between and Korea the FDA. But I already mentioned 2011, we reached the peak, maximum, as far as I know, 200.6 billion. That's all. After that, there is just a stagnant, still now. My next year's the main report topic is that. So maybe I think definitely there is a several reasons. The one thing is a kind of the economic cycle. Just 2 years back, the import also decreasing. And after the 2012-13, in India and Korea, both sides, their economic, the growth is very lower than before. And this is a kind of the economic cycle issues. And one reason is, I think, it is related to a kind of some non-tariff barriers in India. So STPs or TPTs, in the line of development Indian economies, Indian government upgrade a kind of the STP and the TPTs regulations to develop. So maybe there is some increasing of the non-tariff barriers. So and also, but anyway, and one reasons the reason is, I would like to say, the low concession rate in FTA. You know, Korea got just only 85% concession rate from India. We give around 93%, about 95%. Japan, we already seen the slide from Mr. Dr. Singh's, the #1, the world's biggest donor countries. But Japan got the concession rate from India 90%, but we got 85%. So I think some lower the concession rate in the FTA also one of the reasons, I think, why the trade is stagnant. Thank you.
Thank you. Very quick response from Mr. Park.
Regarding how to develop our vendor company, actually, Mr. Kumar was 1996, 1998. He was worked in the plant. So instead of me, you don't mind, he will explain. For the sake of time and exact situation, he will.
Okay. Since you're already running way behind the clock.
So the answer to that question was the volumes were not sufficient to actually make those captive investments. So Hyundai made a conscious decision to have a single source vendor, and the single source vendors were Korean investments, which incubated wherever possible Indian co-investors or a wholly owned Indian investment. That was the reason why we were able to develop that ecosystem in a short time with almost 80% of investments coming from Korean vendors. So that is why we created it, and we created it very fast. And answering your question on the land acquisition, as far as you engage with a state actor, I have not experienced any problem in land acquisition in the last 22 years. And as far as labor is concerned, yes, you cannot hire and fire, but there is a due process to fire, and I have not had a problem in 22 years to fire. That's my answer for you.
Thank you.
Maybe
Dr. Shin for the last word.
Yeah, 20 seconds. If in the future, if I have any chance to participate in the Korea's ODA policymaking process, then I would consider the security issue, which is very important, which has become the biggest political hazard in Korean Peninsula as well now. So we definitely, need to seek India's or other South Asians' assistance in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to the panelists and to the audience for being very patient and for an excellent set of questions as well. We'll now break for tea shortly, and we'll be back here in about 20 minutes or so.
Make it 15 minutes.
15 minutes. Usually Shannon too. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you. Sorry, we had to.